Hey everyone, welcome to Build at Home, another edition. I am your host from his home in Bushwick, Brooklyn, Ricky Camilleri. I'm talking to Tom Colicchio from his home in Brooklyn. We are homebound. We are we are self-isolating. Tom, before we get started, I just want to say really fast, we've been saying this at the top of every interview, 438 million school lunches have gone missing
Yes.
for students across the country due to school closures because of the coronavirus. If anybody is watching this and they are interested in finding out how they can help these children get lunches, please go to nokidhungry.org. On that note, Tom, thank you so much for being here. I know that you yourself are doing a lot for charity right now. You've organized the Independent Restaurant Coalition during this. How are you? It's kind of day by day, I feel like, for everybody, no matter how busy we're keeping ourselves. How are you doing today? How are you feeling?
Okay. This is day 5 of the homeschool or distance learning, which is presenting its own challenges.
Wow.
I think we're finding out more and more who's essential, and hold on a second. And teachers are definitely underpaid. I can tell you that. That said, Independent Restaurant Coalition, every day changes. We feel we make progress, and then it's one step up, 2 steps back. We're fighting hard to make sure that culinary workers, number one, get paid through this crisis, and number 2, have a job to come back to when we get through the other end of this. The work that I've been doing around hunger, it was actually that most of the work that I got involved with early on happened over a month ago. I'm a bit of a news junkie. When I saw this crisis starting to happen in China and then spread to Asia and then to Europe, I started making some phone calls just to say, figure out what's the plan here, because it looked like schools would have to close. And my immediate thought went to 30 million children who are in the school lunch program. And who rely on breakfast and lunch at school. And if those schools closed, what would happen? And so what's great here in New York City, the school systems are still putting food out. And I think I saw, it was today that it was announced that not only children could go, but anyone can go and receive a meal at some of these community feeding centers that in schools. So that's great. The big issue right now is a lot of the anti-hunger organizations, this is the time of year when they do their big fundraisers. When City Harvest does their big fundraiser, and No Kid Hungry does, and when New York Food Bank does, and one of the charities that I'm closely associated with, Children of Bellevue, and that event, we would raise somewhere between $500,000 to $700,000, and that's a big part of our budget for the year. And same thing, Food Bank of New York, it's a $2 million fundraiser. Same thing with City Harvest, I think it's even more than that. So you have, the need is greater. I've been saying this for a while that we're, I used to use climate change, saying that we're one climate disaster away from more people needing assistance, whether it's unemployment or SNAP. We saw that during Hurricane Sandy, where the need just grew because people were out of work. And now the need is just gonna absolutely grow. I mean, you saw the numbers yesterday, 6 million people were seeking unemployment. This is going to be some real tough times, and the organizations that know how to feed people, that are on the front lines of feeding people, number one, they're getting cut off from their funding, and number 2, they rely on volunteers, and people are told to stay home. Yeah. So this is a sort of a double whammy for them right now. And so we're talking in New York, 2.5 million adults who have to use food banks or SNAP. And so, God, we're looking at a big problem. One of the solutions that we're looking at through the Independent Restaurant Coalition is, and then I saw a plan come out of Congress, I think Velasquez's office, that we can turn restaurants into community food feeding centers. And so we know how to feed people, especially if you get a lot of restaurants involved. I think right now they'll pay up to $500,000 for restaurants to pay their employees and to start purchasing food to give out to communities. If they spread this over a bunch of restaurants, you won't have the choke point of going to one place. you'll find a neighborhood, places in your neighborhood where you don't have to walk too far, where you can come and there's a system set up where you can pick up food. For me, I've been very reluctant to do pick up in my restaurant. I don't want my employees to come out for commerce. If I'm trying to make a couple $1,000s a night, I don't want to put my employees in harm's way. And I'm not casting aspersion on anybody else who does this. People have to do what they have to do for their business. But I just didn't feel like I want to do it. Now, if I were feeding hospital workers or I were feeding people in need, people who couldn't afford to go out and get food, I would ask my employees if they wanted to come in for that. I wouldn't tell them they had to. I would ask them, knowing that there's a risk, knowing that my employees have to take public transportation to get to work, knowing that you're going to be working in somewhat close proximity to other people working. So there's a risk involved here. Knowing that, is it worth to feed people who are struggling to feed themselves? I think that's worth. I would go to work for that. Right now, I've been home for 2 weeks. I've only left the house to go, walk around the block with the kids, getting it delivered. So I'm being really careful about this. We do have family members who are sick. They don't have, they're not in the hospital. They're home dealing with it. But so we're taking this very seriously. So I would ask my staff to come in, and I would consider doing that if I knew that we're doing this to help feed people in the community. But it's good.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Tom. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Go.
You said something at the top of this interview, and there's a number of things that I want to talk to you about. I think this is such an incredibly important time for this discussion. But you said something at the top of this interview that I've heard you talk a little bit about in other interviews as well, which is that we're realizing who the essential workers are. And it feels like we're realizing a lot about our society right now. Yes. And I think someone who runs restaurants is really kind of at the forefront of realizing that, simply based off of, as you've said, the profit margins and how slim the sort of the safety net is for restaurant workers and restaurants in general. What do you see? What do you hope we could possibly come out of this with?
It's a good question. And it's a question that some of us are trying to figure out, because I don't think that the restaurant industry will function the way it has going forward. Things will have to change. But again, something this drastic, I don't think there's a safety net that an employer, especially an employer in the restaurant business, could have foreseen or figured out. Even in my case, every year we are putting money back into our restaurants. And so this past year, I spent almost $300,000 redoing our private dining room. We opened a restaurant, so there was money that we spent there. So our CapEx expenditure this past year was pretty robust. And that's the decision that we make, not to give money to partners, but to put back into the business. And so that's how a lot of restaurants function. Especially even the higher end restaurants where you got to constantly keep up. And so, I don't know how you create a safety net to this extent. My feeling is that we need to create a better safety net for the country. Yeah. The way that business is being done over the last 20 years, I think that we have to start looking at the idea that publicly traded companies are quarter to quarter looking at their earnings, and if they don't hit numbers, they just get crushed by Wall Street. That has to come out of somewhere. And lately, it comes out of the workforce. With closer to full employment, workers had a little more power. They just lost all that. Yep. And so, I don't know the answers. I know that there's it's being discussed right now. How does this look differently? For us, there's some things where, looking at the workforce and the way tips are dispersed and the way tips have a hold on the restaurant, business in general and waiters. I mean, there's been a movement to get rid of them. Maybe it's time to do that and go to where someone's getting a very good hourly wage, or they're getting paid, a salary, like other exempt workers and other businesses. And again, this isn't to take advantage of anyone. This is to make it fair. I mean, what I'm hearing right now is for unemployment or for PPP, for restaurants that can actually take part of the stimulus. Waiters are saying, well, how do you calculate tips? Well, if you didn't have tips and you just got a straight hourly wage, it'd just be a lot easier. Now, in my restaurant, all of the waiters actually receive their gratuities on a paycheck. so they can actually prove how much they've been making. So they're going to get compensated. That's fine. But a lot of restaurants don't do that. And so, again, is it time to look at the way we treat restaurant workers and professionalize them and treat them like the professionals that they are, as opposed to, disposable workers. I'm not saying that the whole industry does that, and we certainly don't, but you see how fragile our businesses are. And so, but to me, this brings up a bigger issue. And this is always, my wife made a film, A Place at the Table, about 6 years ago. And the thesis of her film was that if we want to end hunger in this country, we need a larger government response to end hunger. If we want to end hunger, we can. And most people calculate, who look at these issues and think $30 billion a year could end hunger in this country. And then there's some great reasons why you should aspire to that, especially when it comes to children. Children who are going to school hungry, they can't possibly learn, they fall behind. And so if we believe that education is the key to upward mobility, but yet we're sending our kids to school hungry. Now, let's stop blaming the parents. People get into situations for all kinds of reasons. And I think now there may be, because people are realizing how quickly you can not have a paycheck anymore, and how quickly money's going to run out when you still have expenses and there's no money coming in. And so maybe there'll be some more empathy for people who are struggling. And so, but we again, the film looked at how there's been a huge charitable response to try to fill in the gap between what the government does and what the government doesn't do. And there's this huge charitable response. And so, we would think that all the anti-hunger organizations, people who know how to feed people on the front lines trying to end hunger, there's going to be a role for them. But instead of going out there and doing fundraisers to get funded, the government should be funding them. Mm-hmm. And it should be robust. And so people are taken care of. And now maybe because of this crisis, now maybe people will understand why that's important, why it's important that people who are struggling, who are cobbling together coupons and going from place to place and sometimes traveling, 3 or 4 miles because where they live, they don't have supermarkets, and they got to take various modes of transportation to get there. This is not the way we should treat people who live in America. And just maybe there'll be more empathy for this and a better understanding. And so what we're looking at, though, is because it's so extreme right now, we need a government response. I mean, the idea that this government, who for the last 30 years told us that government's the problem, going back to the 80s, government's the problem, big government's a problem, government get off the neck of the worker, of businesses. Okay, this government, all of a sudden, within a very short time, put a bill out there that essentially just paid people, if it actually works out, $2 trillion just went to the economy from the federal government to try to prop up our businesses and trying to prop up our financial systems. And so, see, if they could find $2 trillion like that, well, why can't they find $30 billion to fix hunger, to end hunger? Why can't they find enough money to actually fund healthcare?
Mm-hmm. Where would the money come from?
Where would the money come from?
Where's the money? Yeah,
the money's coming from somewhere now. But again, even the idea that as a government we shouldn't be stockpiling massive amounts of equipment. Listen, hospitals, the work they're doing right now is amazing. But a for-profit hospital, there's no reason why they're going to stockpile tons and tons of equipment and keep in a warehouse somewhere to get ready for a rainy day. It's just not part of the business model. And so if that's not part of the business model, what role does government play to make sure this doesn't happen? And so this is what I think can happen right now, is I think that people are realizing that it's not about big government or shrinking government down to the size that you could drown in a bathtub, the old Grover Norquist idiom. We want smart government that has its priorities in place, that knows how to react to its constituents in times like this. And not only in times like this, but when people are struggling. And so hopefully that's what's going to come out of this. That's all I hope for. For me, I'm an optimist. I have to look at the silver lining somewhere. And that's what I hope we come out of this. Yes, not kind of wrapping it up and saying, oh, a more compassionate, government, a government that actually is compassionate, not that acts compassionate when it needs to. But that's kind of, what I'm hoping for.
Have you been disappointed, or have you been alleviated in some way by this government's current response? How have you felt about it?
I'm feeling great about Congress right now, that they actually got together so quickly. My understanding from the people that I talked to on the Hill is that people were working together. And hopefully that continues. We need a lot more, and we need a lot more of it. I think for the most part, the White House has been somewhat divorced from those conversations. The Treasury Secretary seems to have played a role here, but and I think that's good right now. I think but I am some solace in the fact that we're putting together partisan issues and focusing on what's best for the country and for the people here. So yeah, so I'm a bit hopeful. The actual response to the virus, that's been as piss poor as you could possibly imagine. That's just been terrible. The idea that we didn't know about it, I just read something that in May there was a memo that went to the White House from Bolton's office explaining that we are not prepared for something just like this last May. So no, the response that we've had, our governor's had to this has just been as bad as possibly could be.
We briefly touched on the Independent Restaurant Coalition. We didn't really talk about exactly how it came about and what exactly you're trying to do.
Well, it came about when a friend of mine called me and said that he had a foundation and wants to help. And I kind of said, well, charity's not going to do it right now. I think we need a bigger response. I received another phone call from a friend of mine who I worked with when I was at Food Policy Action. He was a lobbyist that we worked with. And half joking, I said, I think the independent restaurant community needs a lobbyist. And he said, okay, let's do that. Called my friend back and said, I think I know what you can do at your foundation. And he had already been talking to a bunch of restaurateurs. We started our discussion, and I think all of the work that I had done around my wife's film and with Food Policy Action was really a dress rehearsal for this moment, because for me it wasn't about let's pass the tip cup right now. It was about let's get involved and make sure government is responsive. And so we started with a small group and very quickly found another 100 chefs and restaurateurs down south that were working on issues. Found another 100 or so people in Chicago and Illinois that was looking at this issue, some in Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles, other restaurants in New York, and very quickly pulled together leaders from each of these coalitions to come together and form the Independent Restaurant Coalition. Within 2 days, we had funding, we hired a lobbyist, we hired a firm out of DC, and we hired a comms director. So we're working, we're in these meetings. And the great thing is all the stuff that we want, the lobbyist can actually figure out how to work that into the current bills, who to talk to. Is it someone from judiciary, someone from the Treasury? Is it someone from small business? How do you go there and pull all these levers to make sure that the needs of the small independent restaurant community is heard? And so we have people, in the rooms, virtual rooms these days, having these discussions, and it's on an ongoing basis. The CARES Act, it's a good first step. It's not going to get us anywhere near where we need to go. But these conversations are ongoing. And so, that's how it formed, and that's what we're focused on.
We talk about independent restaurants. You're basically talking about small businesses. How much do you find that representation for the independent restaurants, small businesses, is actually affecting people outside of just owners of restaurants or people within people who manage restaurants? So you're actually now talking about kind of the low-income worker, the minimum wage worker, the worker for tips at this point.
Well, not only. You're also talking about mid-level and senior managers as well in restaurants. You're talking about, but again, yes, we're talking about the 11 million people that independent restaurants employ.
Yeah.
And in a lot of restaurants, waiters actually do pretty well. Not all restaurants, but I know what my waiters make, and partially that's tips, and partly it's because of the expense in my restaurants. So you're talking about 11 million people that we employ. Now think about who we indirectly employ: the fishermen, the farmers, the cheesemakers, the winemakers, the person who gives us our linen, the florists, the musicians who may play on a Sunday brunch. My suppliers, my supply chain is probably 70 people deep. And so if you count into, if you look at all the ancillary businesses that we support, it's probably closer to 20 million people. And again, because we're so spread out, these fishermen, these farmers, these musicians, these florists, they're all over the country. It's not just concentrated in one place. And so if dollars are coming through, and this was where we were disappointed with the CARE Act, is we thought there'd be money there to pay our suppliers as well, not just our staffs. Because if we paid our suppliers, they could pay their suppliers. You keep that whole ecosystem going. But that's where it fell short. So right now we can use that money to pay rent, and to pay utilities, and to pay our workers. And so, but then there's a problem there too, because unemployment is so robust. Our workers are saying, well, if I come back, you only can pay me for 2 months. I don't think you'll be open in 2 months. So I'm back on unemployment again. And yet I have to, as an owner, if I tap into the CARE Act, the point of origin on that loan starts when I fill out the app, when I submit the application. So if I get funding, I have till June 30th to hire everybody back, but the clock starts ticking. Okay, so I have 2 months. I'm not going to be open in 2 months, and so we're trying to get them to change the date of origin back. We want to go double it up and get an additional 2 months at least, or make it work where my employees can stay on unemployment, and then when I open up, I hire them back and I can pay their payroll for 2 months. Because when I open up, I'm not going to be busy. There is no way. Let's just say I open in September. I'm not going to be busy. Maybe I'll run at 25% capacity. So if I had that money then, where I could keep my entire team on, and even if they were working 3 days a week, I'm going to pay them for the 40 hours, or pay them for five full shifts if they're waiters, and then I have that for 2 months until business comes back. That would make more sense. And so the mechanics of this bill right now aren't really helping restaurants. And so this is what we're focused on, trying to change some of these rules.
What about rent? When it comes to paying rent for restaurants, most restaurants don't own the building. They are paying rent, a large majority of them. Yet, I mean, I think specifically in New York, landlords don't have to pay mortgages. Do you think that restaurants or small businesses shouldn't have to pay rent at the moment? There should be a rent strike of some kind?
Well, let me just correct one thing. A lot of buildings do have mortgages.
Yes.
They do. And so if I'm on the ground floor of a building, that building may have a mortgage out. And if the income they're getting from me doesn't flow up, they can't pay their creditors, and their creditors may foreclose on their building. So it's not as simple as going on rent strike. I mean, right now, the things that I'm hearing is usually we have to pay a security deposit. That could be as much as 6 months. They should be drawing down off the security deposit right now, because
right.
and just use that. And I'm finding my understanding is some landlords are actually working with people, and some people are saying absolutely not. Small businesses that don't have a lot of money tied up in their four walls. Okay, restaurants do, because we have elaborate HVAC systems and fixtures that are on the walls and things like that you can't take with you. You build a bar, you can't take the bar with you. That's a fixture. So there's a little more negotiation there, because we don't want to leave those leasehold improvements behind. But if you're a store and you have a couple counters and you can take everything with you, you could probably look at force majeure and get out of your lease and walk away, and then reopen somewhere else when the rents go down, because they will go down. But that's a chance you have to take there. Where restaurants, you can't walk away. Restaurants these days aren't cheap. You're talking, anywhere from several $100,000 to $10 million for a build out. And
didn't you just say you put up $1 million for a new restaurant recently too?
Yeah, but only because the landlord put a bunch more money in. And so we got TIs. But then the thing is, when you get those tenant improvements, you pay it back in rent. Your rent's higher. And so you still pay it back somehow. And so, you can't walk away. And then on top of that, the TIs that my landlord put in, I'm personally guaranteed those. So I can't walk away from that. So I have to work with this landlord to try to figure something out. I mean, what you don't want to do is, you get through this, you figure out you can't open up, and all of a sudden I owe a landlord, $4 million that I personally guaranteed. That's not going to help anyone. And so, it's much more complicated than most people think. Even suppliers, a lot of chefs out there, restaurateurs, owners of businesses have personally guaranteed the creditors. And so someone's going to come back to me and say, I have your personal guarantee on this. You got to pay me.
That's my biggest fear about the CARES Act and about the bill that they passed and the bills that they're trying to pass, is that the devil is in the details, and that these things are incredibly complicated and nuanced. And in some respects, it doesn't feel like the details are being as paid attention to as they could be, for the sake of getting something out very quickly and saying, look, we did it. We did something. But everybody else is coming back and saying, well, actually, I can't get this loan because Bank of America is saying that I have to be a borrower to get the loan now. And I'm not a borrower here. I've just had accounts. Or, it's $1,200, which is not that much, it's not that much money for people.
Well, the $1,200 is the check that the Treasury is sending out to everybody who's made less than whatever it is. I mean, that's
it's different than the lending, but yeah.
Yeah. But again, I think that if the CARE Act, what I'm hearing is in 4.0, they're going to try to fix all these technical issues. That's what we're hearing from everybody. They knew they sent this out quickly. They knew there were problems with it. And they're going to try to fix all this. Now, that doesn't get the money out the door right now. Again, my bank, they're not issuing SBA 7As. They're trying to, but they're literally not getting enough information from Treasury to make a decision whether or not there's liability on their end and what they have to do. And so it just makes me nuts when I see the Treasury Secretary go on, sit in front of a podium, go, tomorrow everything's going to flow, everything's going to happen, and they know it's not. And you have Jamie Dimon saying, we're not lending money. The biggest bank, well, the second biggest bank, I think, behind Wells Fargo, saying, no, we're not ready to do this. And yet they're going, yeah, it's all done, it's all ready. It's like, come on. It's like, just be honest. If it's going to take an extra couple of days, say it's going to take an extra couple of days and fix it. I mean, the frustration right now, and this is the problem, is that employees are frustrated because they don't know how to access this money. Employees are frustrated because employers don't know how to access this money and don't really know what information we can give to our employees. Landlords are frustrated because they don't know if we're going to have money to pay them. Banks are frustrated because they're not getting the information from the Treasury. And so everyone's just kind of not quite they don't understand how this all works. And everybody's sitting here trying to figure out, like, what are my options? And then you realize that as a business person, as an employee, as a banker, you don't have good information to make a good plan. And without that, everything is just frozen. And so, who knows? I mean, I'm hoping that, by the end of today, my bank has good information and they can start issuing these loans. But right now, we're in limbo.
Yeah. Before I let you go, everybody is at this point, everybody is getting touched or is going to be touched by COVID-19 in some way, and you yourself have as well. One of your winners on Top Chef Masters passed away, Floyd Cardoz. Can you talk about what it was like hearing that news and tell us a little bit about him?
Yeah, I knew Floyd was sick, and I assumed that he was a healthy guy. And he was 59. I thought he was younger. I didn't realize he was 59. We all expected him to be okay, and then I got the news, and it's just it brings it all home. It's shocking. I mean, I had a young guy who managed one of my witchcraft stores in his 30s who died. I just found out 2 days ago. Wow. He wasn't with us anymore. He left about a year and a half ago. But still, he's known to everybody who worked there, and I have family members that have mild cases, but have been affected by it. I spoke to a colleague today that one of his cooks died last night. Wow. We're going to start hearing more and more of this. I mean, you see the numbers, and I'm not sure where we're at today. I mean, last night it was over 5,000 people. There's also tons of people dying at home that, they're not part of that 5,000 because, if you have to be diagnosed, die of COVID, but you're dying of it, and you're not in the hospital. And so these numbers are just going to continue to grow. We're all going to know people. There's going to be stories. It's going to be like after 9/11 where the stories start coming out, and this is what's sad, and you can't get that back. I mean, Floyd, I've known Floyd for about 20 years. When I was partners with Danny Meyer, Floyd was working at Tabla, was part of that whole restaurant group, and I knew him pretty well. And even now, I would talk to him about once every other month or so. And usually, we talk about business and what was going on. But the thing with Floyd is, and everybody says this, and this is true. Every conversation you had with Floyd, he would talk about his family. Always, always, what his kids were doing. He was really proud of them. They were in college, and he was just that kind of guy. He's just, this is devastating. It's hard to comprehend that someone who you talked to a little while ago, who was healthy and just gone. And this is where you get frustrated. And this is where you get frustrated with, quite frankly, our government's response when they saw this happening and didn't take the necessary steps to make sure that we were protected.
I have to let you go, but before I do, City Harvest has been deemed an essential service by Cuomo, yes, by New York, and you were talking about how these places are having trouble finding volunteers right now. So what can people do for City Harvest?
Listen, they need money. If you have some money to donate, and a lot of people right now are, they want to help. Everybody wants to help, and every bit can help. When you're feeding hungry people, every single bit can help. And so, donate. After this is over, think more about volunteering. But also, when this is over, what we need to do, again, past the charitable response, which is a noble response right now. But when we're through this, use your voice. Use your voice to tell government that having hungry children in this country, also having hungry adults in this country, is not acceptable. Use your voice, because you know what? Nothing ever stops from the top down. If you're going to wait for our members of Congress, and this is what I hear from members of Congress, if you're going to wait for something to come from the top down, it's not going to happen. It's got to come from the bottom up. And that's, Billy Shore, who is with No Kid Hungry, he always says this. This is, we know how to fix hunger. There's certain things that we don't know how to fix. We don't know how to deal with wars in the Middle East, and we don't know how to deal with famines in places like that. But hunger we could fix. We have enough food in this country. We have the resources to do this. We just don't have the moral and the courage of government to say this is unacceptable and we will end it. And so use your voice. Use your voice to tell the people that we hire to help run the country and make our laws that this is unacceptable.
Absolutely. Tom, it's been an honor talking to you, and I appreciate greatly everything that you're doing right now, both with the Independent Restaurant Coalition, City Harvest, and using your voice as much as you can. Thank you so much for joining me. Stay healthy.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
You too.